Okay, so we're talking, welcome everyone. Welcome to Secure Your Serverless Offense and Defensive Measure. So some companies are building out entire architectures on serverless infrastructure. What does that look like? What does security look like in this brave new world? How is it the same? How is it different? Teri, our guest, is here to explain to us, to help us understand the different threat models, the attacks and defenses that you can apply to your serverless application. So let's learn a bit more about Teri. She's the CEO of Second Sight Lab, a cloud and cybersecurity company providing training, pen testing, and assessment. And she's also the author of the brand new book, Cybersecurity for Executives in the Age of Cloud, and a 5-day cloud security class. Awesome. And I'm here with my co-host. I don't see Tanya anymore. I don't know why. But Tanya Janca, also known as She Hacks Purple. Nicole Becher from New York City is also joining us. Hi, Nicole.
Hey, guys.
Okay.
I think she'll figure it out.
She'll figure it out. She's still here? This meeting
She's still here-ish.
Okay,
yeah.
Perfect. Awesome. So yes, now that we have sound and audio, sound and video, Teri, I read your bio, but can you, in your own words, tell us a little bit about yourself?
No, that was great. I do pen testing, assessments, and training in my company, and I've been doing a lot with servers lately in terms of pen testing, and yeah, I think you said everything else, so that sounds great.
Awesome. Okay, so before we start talking about serverless security itself, I'd like us to spend some time defining serverless. So at first, personally, I thought it was Lambda function, maybe function as a service, but it seems that with time, the definition has expanded. And could you tell us a little bit more about that? When we say serverless security, serverless, what are we talking about?
So I think, as with any definition, you'll get different opinions, but when I was around when serverless, that word came about, and I would go to reInvent and they'd announce 150 services. I'm an AWS Hero, if you know what that is. And so we get to go to the keynote, and they would announce, they announced Lambda, and I didn't quite get what it was at first. I was like, okay, it's one of those things. So I went back and looked at it, and I went to actually to a meetup at Amazon because I live in Seattle, and they did a demo and they talked about it, and it really clicked with me what it was. And so my opinion of serverless was yours, like it's functions, because that's where the word came from. But then recently I've been following a lot of the serverless community. I was speaking at some serverless events when we could still do that. And I was at an AWS influencer conference last year, and there was a woman there who had just gotten into cloud and computing about 2 years ago. So I was talking to her about this definition, and we actually discussed it in the serverless group. And her opinion was that it was anything you didn't have to configure a server for. So that would go all the way back to Amazon's first service, which was SQS, or queuing service. That encompasses a lot more things than just Lambda. So depending on who you talk to, you'll get a different opinion. But then there are companies like iRobot who are building out complete architectures on serverless. Like they're just, I don't know if they've done it yet, but I know my friend over there who's also an AWS Hero was talking about, just eliminating all virtual servers and having everything 100% serverless, which is really interesting. I mean, that's a pretty substantial company. They got their robots talking to the cloud and things like that. So it's pretty, a lot of applications going on there. So very interesting.
Awesome. And do you have an example of a company that built an entire architecture with serverless? Because
I think, iRobot was the one that I know of. And Ben Kehoe is my friend over there, and he's always talking about serverless. But then you have other people building complete serverless frameworks as well. So the person that built the serverless framework is also an AWS Hero. So he's built this framework where you can run all the functions from different clouds on their platform. So a lot of people are doing this now.
So you would think that, Tanya, I know you talk a lot about the shared responsibility model. Do you want to maybe talk to us about that and how we would question that with serverless?
So the shared responsibility model is that some is some is the responsibility of the cloud provider, but some is you, right? And so, for instance, infrastructure as a service, you can say, hey, AWS, please give me, a VM and run it magically for me, but give me the VM and have this version of Linux on it. But then you have to patch it from then on. And with serverless, where does that fall? Very good question, Nancy.
What's left? Yes, if they're taking care of, it seems pretty much everything. What is our responsibility to secure serverless?
Definitely, you can't write a serverless app, for instance, like that doesn't have any throttling on it or doesn't have any authentication or authorization, or like if anyone can call it at all. Like for APIs, you usually put like a gateway in front of them, and then you usually put them through a service mesh. So if you're having serverless that just has no defenses, then that means people can call it and they can talk dirty to it. They can feed it whatever type of things they want. And so like when you write your code must be secure. When you configure it, you must configure it securely. I don't know how many configurations are required with serverless, but I feel like Teri might know.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. So, and this is, when I talk about serverless, I talk about, one of the most important things to me is your code. So I've seen a lot of talks where attackers will go in and they'll try to reverse engineer the Lambda functions or the Azure or the Google functions, and they'll find some sort of flaw and they'll do a DEF CON style talk. I'm like, yeah, but how long is that going to last? Because as soon as you announce that or publish it, first of all, you're probably get in trouble if you don't disclose it initially to the cloud provider because it's against their terms of service. So as soon as they find out about it, they're going to fix it. And once you fix it, it's fixed for everybody on the entire platform, right? Because the virtual of how the cloud works. But in your own code, if there are a whole bunch of customers that have the same flaw and one customer fixes it, all the other customers still have the same flaw. So to me, the biggest risk is your own code and your own configurations. And those include network configurations, those include your IAM privileges that you give your Lambda functions and your code, that your application that you're running. So all those things are really important. How you do your authentication, authorization in your API, don't give it a key, give it a more robust form of authentication.
Yeah. So in a lot of ways, though, is that really so different, right? If somebody breaks IAS and makes a big DEF CON talk about it and says, I broke IAS, and then Microsoft releases a patch and that fixes it for everyone who applies that patch, right? So you have that latency around how quickly can you get that patch applied, right? So that's definitely a little bit of a difference here because Amazon could just fix it like that, right? But then you still have that code base, right? So if you are not parameterizing your queries, you're doing something else that like causes your app to be insecure. You sort of have the same kind of, like, as much as things change, they kind of stay the same, right? It's still pretty much the same deal here. Would you agree?
Exactly. That's exactly, yeah, I 100% agree with that. And that's why I try to tell people, they think, oh, like a lot of developers think, oh, they can't get a foothold because, you can't really get in and get a foothold on a Lambda function. There's some things you can do, people talk about, but it's really limited. And so they think, well, they'll just be gone in a few minutes and no one can do anything. Well, if someone gets a SQL injection on your Lambda function, it's going to work the same way as if you're running on a web server or in a container, right? It's going to still pull back the data from the database and get more than it's supposed to. So those attacks still pretty much work the same way. And I always talk about the OWASP top 10, where they said they tried to come out with a serverless version, and basically now there's a serverless interpretation, and it's all the same attacks. They just show you how to do it within a function.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is a lot the same. And going back to the shared responsibility model, there are certain things that the cloud manages for you. So they're gonna, when you're running your, basically it's a container, right, a Lambda function, and they're going to update the underlying infrastructure for you. So they're gonna patch and things like that. Those things you don't have to do, but you still have to do that part that is your code, the things that you control and configure. And I always like to say, if you can touch it in the code and you can change it in the cloud and you can change it, it's probably your responsibility. So.
Would you say, Teri, that maybe there's like some extra things that we could do for serverless apps that are like kind of serverless specific though? Like for instance, like putting a gateway in front of it, or like not forgetting to apply logging. Because a lot of people are like, it's serverless, I don't need to log it. Like, you still totally need to log it. Like, are there any extra things that maybe we want to do?
I think, again, those all still apply in the serverless. Like, yeah, you're exactly right. When I do pen tests and assessments, a lot of times I find that people aren't turning on all the logs in the cloud. And there are, for each different service in the cloud, there are usually different kinds of logs. And depending on the service, sometimes some of the services are more centralized in how they log, and other ones you have to go into each specific thing and turn on the logs. So you have to understand all those things. And if you're not logging and watching the logs, which is a lot of people forget to do. Yes, Tanya knows. And that sort of thing, incident response. So, and so if people aren't watching those logs, they're not going to know when they're compromised. I've actually worked in audits where I talked to teams and I asked them what they were doing when the different teams become responsible for these things as opposed to the IT team or the security team. And a lot of them are like, what are you talking about? I don't know. I have to watch those logs. So understanding, turning those logs on. And yes, API gateways are a good mechanism. If you're using APIs, put an API gateway in front of it. It's a good idea.
Question about logging. Like I think traditionally people relied on web server type logging, right? Like Apache has the access log, error log, things like that, right? And those kind of come out of the box, default turned on, right? In serverless, like what is the best practice there for logging? Like, is it like, how do you map those things? How do you map access logs and, error logs and things like that people are used to in the traditional world to the serverless world?
Good question. So in each cloud provider, the logs are a little different, but they all have this idea of, I'm blanking on the word right now, but when you have a serverless function, you have a bunch of different APIs being called, and they maybe chain together. So one API calls another, calls another, calls another, and you have some security incident, and you have to figure out which API caused that problem. It's challenging. So there are different ways to kind of map out those function calls, and each of the cloud providers has a special service that is built around tracing those function calls and finding out where the problem occurred. The other thing is for access logs, if someone was to get into a function, they could steal your credentials, and each of the cloud providers has a mechanism for access logs where you can go in and see any function that was called on that cloud service. So they have different names, but each of the cloud provider has a sort of access log. So again, it's really important, like you guys are all bringing up, understanding the different logs in the cloud and where they are and how you're going to get handle on when something happens.
Would you say that like sometimes software developers forget that like just because this one serverless app always calls that serverless app, that they still have to have like security between the two of them? Like they're just like, oh, like the main app that has all the security calls, serverless thing 1, and we'll secure that. But then serverless thing 1 calls serverless thing 2, and they're like, I'm sure it's fine.
Oh, you're totally right. Yeah. And that kind of brings, this kind of revolves around zero trust, where you don't trust something just because it's on your internal network or just because you think it only has access from your internal resource. And there's different ways you can handle that. I'm a big fan of networking, because networking can allow you to create those segmentation layers and also view the logs between different layers in your application. And additionally, obviously, you have different authentication and things like that. In each of the cloud providers, they work different ways, but you can create a function which is only available from within your cloud environment. So you have your sort of DMZ, your API gateway, Lambda, coming in, and then you can have your application layer functions the same way you would do in a traditional architecture. So yeah, very important.
That's
cool. And to that point though, if you were gonna sort of, for people who may not be that familiar with this type of model, or how to implement the model, or how to even get started with service mesh, right? Like how do you begin there, or what is service mesh, and how do you begin the process of? So now you've just created, you went from a monolith to 300, Lambda functions, and like, wow, what do we do now?
So what am I trying to say? Mesh is used a lot between containers, but when you're working with, for example, AWS Lambda, it's not necessarily mesh. You're using traditional architecture, traditional network. I should say Amazon traditional networking. You're creating your same networking that you create for an EC2 environment. You can do this with their Kubernetes is a very different animal. It's kind of like we forgot about networking. We're going to tack it on after the fact. But when you're talking about Amazon's initial container serverless offering, it actually works very similar to traditional networking, where you can apply what's called a security group on a container, and you can do sort of similar things with Lambda functions. So it's going to depend a little bit on the cloud provider, but you can still create those traditional tiered networking. If you're talking about a Kubernetes cluster, it's completely different. You're going to have a serverless mesh. You have this kind of like tacked on proxy, serverless, not serverless, a proxy that's kind of sitting in the middle between all your containers, or tacked onto the side to try to create those network controls. So it's a little bit different. And so it's going to depend on the serverless environment you're using, but it seems like they all kind of have this ability to create networking. In Google Cloud, you cannot, as far as I can tell, and I've had someone from Google Cloud in one of my classes, you cannot create a traditional three-tier architecture. Their networking is just so different. It's just very different. It's more almost like it's almost more like IAM and authentication, but just keep that in mind. But you can create those sort of network controls.
Do you think, I guess this is more of a question for you, it's more of an opinion, is Kubernetes serverless, in your opinion? Is managed Kubernetes more serverless? It sort of gets into that territory where I'm not sure. In some cases, it kind of is, right? Yeah.
It's kind of like IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS, where people argue like, no, that's a PaaS and that's a SaaS. I'm like, who cares? Just secure it. Right? I don't know. But I would think most people would think that it's not serverless, because you have to, typically you're setting up, unless you're using the pure like Kubernetes service from AWS, which is actually really cool. You don't have to set all that infrastructure up. Most of the time you're setting up your own servers and running all those pods and things on EC2 instances or on virtual machines. So, I mean,
then it becomes serverless. Yeah. It's like serverless on top of servers, which is, I guess, what all serverless is at the end of the day.
It gets confusing, right?
Yeah.
I have a question for the chat, Tanya. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Okay, so Scott asks, cloud is great for producing an inventory of things for billing, right? Are there any specific tools in Azure, AWS, GCP, or open source that are useful to take that data into a threat model? Pros, cons?
For billing or for inventory itself?
I think for inventory.
Inventory, yeah, definitely. So I like the cloud platform, and immediately, like, I know, like Tanya, you're also a software developer. So immediately when I saw the cloud, I saw tons of possibilities. I used to run sort of my own little mini data center, although I use that term loosely. But I had my little rack. I had to go there in the middle of the night and put in the servers and reboot them if something went wrong, and it was a pain. And I wish someone would do it for me. And so I love the cloud because all of those things are automated, and you have this platform which basically gives you an inventory of everything that's running. And yes, I have created tools that I use on assessments where I query this data and I basically scan it and look through it for problems. So I think this inventory data is very useful. You can inventory and pull down your IAM policies and look at them. What permissions do people have? You can query, as I show. I posted a link in my Twitter feed from a talk we did 2 years ago at RSA, and I talked about basically mapping your way back from a database to find out if you could get to it. So starting with the database, you could query what's the network around the database, what can access it, okay, go from there, back to the beginning, what's on the web tier, and then kind of break in. And so, yeah, I think all that inventory data is very powerful for security people because you can see what's out there. Hopefully you have tagged it, identified it in such a way that's meaningful. But for the attackers who get in, you can also just query and find all the vulnerabilities too. So it's a very, very useful thing.
So he was saying like a bit more. So I was trying to search for a tool. Nancy, didn't we have someone named Jayesh on the show at one point? And we met him in Israel.
Yes,
he was really cool. We loved him.
But he wasn't on the show.
Oh no, we never ended up having him on the show.
Yeah. He shared the Cloud Village. He managed the Cloud Village at DEF CON last year.
Yeah, that was really awesome. He was great. Okay, so another thing that Scott was saying, like as a follow-up. So first of all, Adrian's like, wow, Nicole, dishing the hard questions.
as always.
So Scott says for building threat models, like using the data available in the cloud, like identifying the missing things that we just talked about, like is there like some sort of threat modeling tool specifically that can take the stuff from the cloud? I don't know. I'm not like an expert in the whole threat modeling thing. Teri or anyone else, do any of you have questions or like thoughts on like specifically like something that could take the stuff from the cloud and then do some sort of threat modeling with it?
I mean, personally, if you can use the cloud tools, you can do it yourself. I'm not aware of something that would necessarily map that out. There are networking tools that will show you, for example, Dome 9, which is purchased by Checkpoint, for example. My friend I used to work with at Capital One works over there now, and they will kind of create a map of your network. I know that there's a topology kind of in Azure itself that will kind of map out your network and show you, so you can kind of see if there's a path through your network to get to something in your cloud. And there are other, I think Red Seal has something similar. And I haven't looked specifically, but there are a lot of companies out there. You know, it's really easy to go get a demo in the marketplaces and try any of them out. But if you're a software developer, it's not hard to create these things yourself. You go grab the CLI, grab the SDKs, whatever they're available, and you start running queries. And it's like a database, and you query the network and you query you know, what's out there, and just it doesn't take that long to do that if you are a software developer and familiar with those things.
Yeah, and everything has an ARN in AWS. You can sort of use that as a way to model things, right? Every Lambda function has its own unique identifier, and then that's how we do it, right? You pull down all the things that exist, then you try to, you know, do a traditional threat model, at least privilege it and things like that to make sure that you are building something that is architecturally sound. So, yeah.
Exactly. I was just working on that, and I don't have a specific tool that I use. I just write queries myself, but I was just doing that where I was pulling down, you know, okay, what are the roles in this account, and what are the permissions? Like you're just talking about Lambda functions, they're all going to have a role associated with them, and what can they access in your account? So taking a look at that and seeing what's available.
In the chat, there's a couple people who are talking about, they said that Cloud Mapper is cool for mapping and auditing, like specifically against standards or missing standards. And then someone else was mentioning, so I've integrated threat modeling at the top of the sprint using Microsoft threat model software, and also Threat Dragon, which is from OWASP, that's really helpful. And then again, someone's responding to your comment, like commercial tools, Dome 9, that's now Checkpoint, Redlock, which is now from Palo Alto, and Cloud Conformity, which is now from Trend Micro. So it appears if you make really cool threat modeling tools, the lesson here is that a really big company will buy you.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say those are necessarily specifically threat modeling tools. So if we use Dome 9 at, well, I should say Threat Dragon is, but I actually talk about that in my class, but it seems like it's still a little bit under development. I don't know, you guys are OWASP people, tell me if I'm wrong, but it has some functionality. I don't particularly use it when I'm on assessments, but it's kind of cool.
When did you last look at it? Because I think they stopped working on it for a while, but in the last 2-3 months, it's...
in 2-3 months they fixed it? Oh, yeah. So my last class was in January when I looked at it. So I don't know, maybe they have some updates now. But it's got a really cute picture, and I love dragons, so I always bring it up in class, and I think it's pretty cool. And I also like the fact that one of the things it does though is it goes and looks at your GitHub repo, so you have to decide if you want to give access to that to a third-party tool. So there's all these considerations, and the same is true for any of these tools where you're, well, not any of them. Like Cloud Mapper is cool because you run that in your own account, and it goes out and grabs some data. But it doesn't send that data somewhere else. With some of the SaaS products, especially for me when I'm doing assessments for another customer, I can't just go use any product and send all my customers' data to that product. It's not cool, right? I would have to ask my customer, is it okay if I send my data to this third party? So I tend to use a type of tools or my own queries where I can evaluate in my own cloud account. But some of these tools are going to look at best practices. I don't think of them so much as threat models, although you can feed that data into a threat model when you're looking at a specific attack within the account. Like, oh, we have all these open these things open to the internet. Where could I go from here? What could I do? How could I attack that? What could go wrong, as they say?
Yeah.
So, yeah, lots of tools out there for that.
Oh, sorry. There's one more comment from
yeah. Go.
So someone was saying that they're using Prisma at work, and then it's not threat modeling directly, but they take the stuff out of Prisma and then they're mapping it to the attack cloud matrix, to internal queries to ensure coverage and visibility. That sounds pretty interesting. And then they operationalize those queries. I guess basically it's like, wouldn't it be lovely if there was something out of the box that would do this? But it sounds like if you have really smart people and you have some tools that you can hack them together and be like an awesome tech person and make stuff happen, but there's no like magic button, unfortunately, yet. That's my key takeaway.
No, I think you're right. And if you think about all the different environments out there, and especially serverless, because right in serverless, you take all these building blocks and you just kind of plug them together. Every environment is going to be a little different. I think it was back in the day when everyone kind of did a standard 3-tier architecture, and you had maybe IaaS, and then you had your app server, and then you had your database. It was all the same. But now when you're trying to do a threat model, especially in the cloud where you got all these different components, you kind of have to take this information and piece it together and say, okay, where can I go from here? What can I do? So I think we can get better. And I'm actually working on, better queries for this. I think we can do some of these queries, but I think it's still, in each environment, it's really good to have someone who understands how that application works. One of the cool things that Amazon is doing is something called provable security. And I really like this concept, and I hope they take it much farther. And I think this may be what we're kind of getting at here. And what they do is they analyze IAM policies and they tell you whether someone could do something bad or not. And it's this idea of using this sort of mathematical calculations to map out all the logic, like how could someone get in and do something bad? And I love that concept. It's something I'm kind of working on with my assessments too, but I don't have anything out there I can just give someone at the moment. But this idea of sort of mapping out all the possibilities and what could go wrong.
And how did you call that?
I'm sorry, what?
What did you call that? You said Amazon does.
So they have something, they call it Zelkova. It's not actually a service that you use, but it's their kind of internal methodology. And the thing that currently uses Zelkova is called IAM Analyzer. So if you go into AWS and you use IAM Analyzer, it will try to analyze all your IAM policies and tell you if you have something bad in there. And it's using this concept of this mathematical modeling where it's trying to, if you think about it, you can do this. And it's something I kind of wrote about in my book. If you think about all the open ports you have with everything exposed to the internet, if you reduce the number of open ports, you've reduced your risk, right? To some degree. I mean, something could still happen, but it's just, you can prove that you have more access when you have more open ports or not. It's just math, right? So it's kind of that same concept of trying to get in there and prove whether an attack is possible and to prove what could potentially be accessed.
So question about pen tests and assessments, right? So it sounds like you've done many, many of these. Is there an approach like that works better? Traditionally there's like the black, white, gray box kind of style, right? Is there a change here? Would you rather do more of a white box assessment here because so much depends on configurations? Or does none of this apply and it's the same story as it ever was? Or what's the difference here, I guess?
I love that question. So I am not, I started out like Tanya, I was a software developer, right? And so I don't come from the traditional, I've been pen testing for 20 years background. So my opinion may not match with everyone else's, but coming from the software background and seeing the power of the cloud, I always tell my customers, like, it's a waste of time for me to do a network scan on your cloud because first of all, I mean, you don't have fixed IPs. I'm probably, if I can, I test from AWS without fixed IPs. That probably drives some people crazy. And I can do it with fixed IPs if I have to, but that's not real world. Like people are coming from different places or attacking systems. And when you get to the cloud, all these IPs are changing. So if you give me a list of IPs on the day of the pen test starts, and I've had this happen, they change throughout the pen test. So I say, give me domain name, right? Because domain names are what are going to be constant. Unless you have all fixed IPs, which most people don't. I mean, elastic IPs or something, which is not a good cloud model or a traditional.
Or there's some load balancing going on, which,
Yeah, so there's that. And the other thing is, I'm like, hey, I have 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and the attackers have forever, and they're just scanning the entire internet and finding any flaw and breaking in. Some of them are more targeted, but so I only have a couple weeks. So why don't you just let me query your cloud and find all the, like you're saying, find all the configuration errors. I can map out the networking so fast, and then I can focus on the things that really matter. I always do a web app pen test if I can with a cloud assessment or a cloud, not a cloud pen test, because that's typically how someone's going to break in. Either you have left something completely wide open. We've seen so many S3 buckets. You've seen so many databases exposed. It's either going to be that, or there's going to be a way to break in through the application. So for example, I found one where I was doing a test and they were using a file upload to S3 buckets. And I realized that I could simply, the application would block the ability to get in there and put something bad in that bucket. But I could simply use burp, replay the file upload to the S3 bucket, and I could put anything I want in there. I could put malware, I could put, some sort of attack, so that when the admin opened, it would send me their cookies, So I like to do the web app pen test along with the cloud pen test, the traditional sort of architecture or assessment pen test.
Yeah, makes sense. And in terms of documentation, right? So like not all serverless functions are APIs. I mean, some of them are, right? Some serverless functions that people write are actually APIs and exposed to an API gateway, but others are just internal plumbing types of connectors and things like that. Just in terms of keeping, documentation, like, are there any tricks that you've learned in your career here to like keep this stuff documented well? Like, how do you document some of these connections, right? When you have this explosion in complexity and just different objects that are kind of controlling data flows from an either outside, inside, or just internally in the cloud. Just seems like people struggle there.
So there are a lot of examples of architectures, API serverless architectures out there. So if you want to see how other companies are doing it, like, so right now, I don't build serverless architectures, I attack them. So there's a couple of things that, and I have asked for documentation as part of an assessment. If I do an assessment, I do the architecture review. And I've noticed that the documentation is sort of there sometimes and not super there other times. But if you want some good examples, I would say go to the AWS architecture and all the cloud providers have architecture samples, and take a look at how they're doing it, because there will be a lot of good examples out there for documentation. In terms of documenting the APIs, another thing I talked about recently was Swagger. So Swagger is a way to get in there or the open API specification, basically, which Swagger turned into, is a standard for documentation of APIs. And we used this at a place I work, and it was really cool. One of the guys on my team started using it, and I was like, hey, this is great, because it shows that people are testing, not necessarily pen testers, but the actual QA people, everything about the API, so they can go in there and test it. The other developers know how to call it, and then they have tools that create UIs you can use to attack it. And I recently demonstrated how to fuzz using a Swagger file, basically go in there and, again, wrote some code to just read the Swagger file, generate curl commands, and attack, combine it with a fuzz list and attack it all really quickly. So in terms of documenting the APIs themselves, I do like Swagger for multiple reasons.
Yeah. Is that on GitHub, your API fuzzer?
I do not have on GitHub. It's not really.
Sorry, I don't mean to put you on the spot. Right.
No, but it's really easy. It's very simple.
Seems very useful. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not very many lines of code. Someone asked me, why don't you use Burp? And so Burp has this thing where you can pull in a Swagger file and it will find all your APIs for you. But the challenge that I faced, again, this is why it's like not ready for prime time, is because the authentication mechanisms are different. So on a Microsoft API, it would go, it wasn't Microsoft, it was a combination of AWS calling a Microsoft authentication server, right? And so it would need to go out there and get a token, and then if it expired, to refresh the token, and then a separate call to use the token. And that's not all built into Burp at this time. Maybe it will be soon. And then another one that I used was using just a simple key, not the best option. And so you have to kind of handle those authentication mechanisms. And I wrote the code to automatically refresh when it timed out. So I don't know if you've probably been in Burp, you took an old request and you tried to run it again. You're like, oh, my token expired. I gotta get a new token. Whatever. So it kind of handled all that stuff for me.
There are a lot of questions in the chat. Can I go to the chat for a bit?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so some of them are comments and some of them are chats. So do you think that risk increases when integrating on-prem environments to cloud compared to all systems, services, logic in a single cloud provider? Well, yeah. Having on-prem and cloud versus just cloud, I'm just like, yeah, but maybe I should just let our guest answer.
No, you're right. So it was interesting when I was in Melbourne with Tanya, but after we hung out for a week doing really cool stuff, I taught a class and they had this evening session and I didn't go to it, but I asked the people the next day, like, what'd you learn and what'd you find out? And they said one of the questions to the panelists was, if you had, and they're all like pen testers and stuff, if you had the choice of pen testing in the cloud or pen testing on premises, which would you want to do? And they're all like, on premises, right? Because there's so many different attack vectors, right? So, but I think if you do it right, you can securely do a hybrid cloud. You just have to think about how you're going to segregate your on-premises network, do all those right things. So when you connect, like maybe you have a database that you have to connect back to or something, you have to really think through that risk and that threat model and really try to segregate that thing you're connecting to, and vice versa with the cloud, right? You just want to make sure that you have kind of segregated those things out and secured them properly.
So a follow-up question to that is, have you seen attackers jump from on-prem to the cloud or from the cloud to on-prem?
Let me think about that. I have, I look at the breaches like literally every day. I'm looking at like cloud breaches and stuff. But a lot of the cloud breaches, this is my opinion on attackers in the cloud. When it first came out, they didn't know what to do with it. And they have so many easy things to attack on premises. They're like, I'm not going to bother with cloud. But then they kind of figured out like, oh, these S3 bucket things, that's kind of cool, and of course databases. So I think right now we haven't seen a lot of those things. I don't do incident response 100%. So maybe more people have, but I haven't seen them reported in the news that way. But what's really interesting is with the Capital One breach, it wasn't just a data exposure. They got into a server and they pivoted to another. So we could see this type of thing. I should mention also, there are issues such as we know, most people know by now, people publishing secrets or tokens or credentials in GitHub. So this is one way you can go from, sort of outside the cloud to inside the cloud. And the other one is definitely happening where someone would get onto a developer's laptop and steal credentials. And I know someone at a pen test at a large company that did that. And my friend was like, that's not fair. They got on my Mac and they got my credentials and they had a cron job running. I'm like, it's totally fair. Like anything's fair, right? For an attacker. But yeah, so I've heard of things like that happening. Luckily in that case, it was a pen test and not an actual breach.
Well, don't you think that maybe those are details that you just wouldn't share publicly? Like anywhere that I've worked, wherever there's like an incident, even like we might be like, there's a potential exposure of this data, customer data, because blah, but it's like, I'm not going to tell you how anyone did that. I don't want to give anyone ideas.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it depends on the industry you're in, but yeah.
Yeah.
So follow-up question, or there's just so many more questions. So if it's okay, I'm just going to slowly lob them to you. So have you seen attackers, so do you find that there's more exploitable flaws due to integration? So like, are the integration points tend to be the insecure parts, like for instance, like access to secrets, etc.?
So it depends how it's done. I do think anytime you have an API, that's a point of integration. When I say Panda serverless, I'm going to go after the APIs, right? All the time. I mean, the whole cloud is a API-based platform, and it's all APIs or integration, right? So yes, I think that is the point of attack. And your question about secrets, it really depends on how the secrets are implemented, right? So if you implement them correctly, they will be more secure. If you use a vault or the cloud, all three cloud services have a way to manage secrets where you don't store them in your code, you don't store them in I just saw this on an assessment. I ran did a query of all the functions, and in the environment variables, it looked like there was a whole bunch of secrets and credentials. So I had to go back to team and go, I don't know what these are, but this doesn't look right. So don't put them there, put them in the vault, write a little line. It's like one line of code. It's very simple, and call back from the vault to get your secret. So depends.
Yeah, you can even use your CI/CD to call out to the vault to get your secrets. So you don't have to have any secrets in your CI/CD anywhere either.
And Amazon has SSM Secrets Manager, which is one line of code and a Lambda function. Yeah,
definitely. And Secrets Manager is the best. They start out with the, let's see, there's SSM, parameter store, but I like Secrets Manager better for various reasons. So yeah, that's the one you use.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so a question about training, Teri. In your opinion, does it make sense to have a security team hired, or does it make more sense to hire some freelance person and have that person come a couple times a week and train the team that you already have? So like hire an external team or like bring someone in that trains the team you already have. I say that because it seems that with serverless, lots of stuff is already covered by the vendor.
So security is a big topic. And I think people often think of security as a small subset of what it really is, right? So you have a lot of different aspects. You have your network security, you have your application security, you have your IAM, all that stuff needs to be configured correctly. But there's a whole other aspect of security, which is incident handling, response. You have to have someone monitoring the logs all the time, watching for, and again, it depends on the size of your company, right? You do what you can if you have a small company. But at a big company, you're going to have a separate incident response team, and their sole job is focused on handling those incidents, or you bring in an outsider to do that specific function, because there are certain ways you need to handle that data properly, legally in an incident. And if you want to take it to court, I don't know how it is Canada, but like if you mishandle that data and you take it to court, they're going to throw it out. So incident response and incident handling is a whole big part of security. Another part of security is governance. How do you get people to do the right thing? And there's a whole thing around that, and it goes to your entire company, not just your serverless functions, right? And then you have your risks managers, and you also have the people who are monitoring the logs. And so Amazon claims they don't have a SOC, they have one person, but they probably have done extensive amounts of automation and what have you. But typically a company, like when I worked at a company, I love the SOC. I walked in, there's like tons of computers and screens, and they're watching anonymous to see if they're going to attack the bank, whatever. So to me, I think some people have a really small, narrow definition of security. It's much larger than that. At a small company, you're going to do what you can. A big company, you're going to have more specialized teams. And so going back to training, I think it's awesome to get every single person trained on security in your company that's working with code or configuration, so they understand the attack vectors, they understand what's going on. But I also think it's really valuable to have people that specialize in those special security functions if you have a larger company with very sensitive data, focus on those things. That's my short answer, or my long answer.
Awesome. He says, thank you. That's amazing. Do you happen to know a good resource for security unit tests? The audience asks that, but I want to know.
Tanya wants to know. So let's talk about unit tests for a second. A unit test is a test of a very tiny piece of code. It's a very specific function in your code that does one really specific thing, right? So a unit test tests that little function. And one of the things I saw as a professional doing unit tests is that it's a lovely idea. I don't know how many of you tried unit tests, but when you try to unit test everything and keep them up to date as you make code changes, my experience has been the unit tests get turned off. So I think unit tests are useful, but they have that issue. The other thing is they're usually controlled by the developers. So if you want to do a test that is going to be assessing things that developer can't turn off, you want to have it external to that. So that's just my comment overall on unit tests. I don't know of a specific tool that does security at that level. I'm kind of a fan of checking things at a more integrated level when it's going through your pipeline. So that's just my take on it. Although every developer who's writing unit tests can build security into their unit tests and check for bad behavior.
Cool, cool. So more questions. Canan asks, what is your approach when an application hosted on the cloud is to be pen tested? So I feel like that's an entire show.
Yeah.
It also feels like that's a talk that you and I already did.
Yeah, I know. We kind of did it. But yeah, no, when I pen test, I come in and I like to combine, like we were talking about earlier, I like to combine an assessment and a pen test. So I like to run some queries and some scans to find out what's open to me to attack without even having to break in, right? So I'll start there. And then I'll take those, usually a web server, and I'll start going after the traditional pen test. I'll start going after the web server or the web application, use fuzzing or whatever sort of traditional OWASP top 10 sort of burp attacks, go in there and try to attack every which way I can to try to break in. And then if I get in, I'll try to pivot from there. The thing that's different in the cloud is if you can get onto something like a Lambda function or a EC2 instance, is that thing may have credentials that can get to something else. So for example, in the Capital One attack, someone broke into, it was an EC2 instance, but they used the credentials off that instance to get to a bucket, right? And that's your whole kind of the thing in the cloud. I mean, to me, it's the same thing you could do on premises, but you're using different technologies and different techniques for authentication in the cloud. So you just have to be aware of how those work.
So there's a bunch of people that are just saying like, thanks, that's awesome. And like, oh, that's so good. And I'm going to take those comments back to my management, ask for budget. So there's lots of like positive affirmations. And there's one last question. So in your experience when doing cloud security architecture reviews or assessments, what advice can you share that you learned from your first assessment to the ones that you do now? Isn't the first one the one where you learn almost 90% of all the things you learn?
Well, but it's interesting because they're so different. It's like the first one I did, they had a VM that was connecting to the cloud. So I like got to use my reverse engineering skills and go like, run strings over it. That's like really not hardcore, but like try to find things in the VM that are connecting to the cloud. That's so different than something that's purely in the cloud and running 100% in the cloud. I think on all of them, I say the CIS benchmarks are awesome. Go check those CIS benchmarks, find out if there's some sort of flaw. It's a great tool. And let's see what else. I mean, the things that I find on the web apps, I'm pretty sure I don't do on-premises or outside the cloud testing that much right now, but I'm sure you're going to find those same flaws that I'm finding in those cloud-based applications that I'm finding everywhere else. The thing that was different was the ones where they're connecting to S3 and doing weird things, or something like that. But a lot of the flaws themselves are either problems, CIS benchmark problems, or they're cloud security flaws. And I will have to say that the logging I don't know, there's nothing really different from my first one to my last one. The logging's never on. Like people don't turn on the logging. They may have CORS misconfigurations in their cloud services. And sometimes I usually find something that's unencrypted, I'll usually find something, whether it's an EBS volume or S3 bucket or whatever. So I don't know if it's changed that much. Sorry, I'm trying to think of something.
Unfortunately, right?
Yeah.
So there's one more comment. So thanks, Teri. But would that mean that all pen testers need to have some knowledge of cloud? And as in the world are moving to cloud, so that could be necessary, that all pen testers have to have some knowledge of cloud. Yeah.
If you're going to pen test the cloud, yes, because a lot of the things that I teach in my security class are just basic security, but then how it works in the cloud, right? And there are things that are the same concept, the security itself, the mechanisms that you can use in most clouds, I should say, in most IaaS clouds have not changed that much, but you have to understand the tools. You have to understand how to use the CLIs. You have to understand how the different functions and features work, what's available to you, how are things cached, like there's a lot of different things in the cloud and a lot of different configurations, and just going and understanding whether you're on the offense or the defense. I always say RTCM, read the cloud manual. And how it works to attack it or to defend it, right?
That's awesome.
I got one more quick question.
Okay.
In terms of, without getting into vendors, just the whole static analysis tool set, right?
Yeah.
Have you found them to be getting better at scanning, doing static analysis against Lambda functions, or where do you think that is in the evolution of static tooling?
So I looked at this I haven't tested them all, is what I want to say, but I have looked at this a lot from just an analytical perspective. And I also did try to get the ability to use some of these static analysis tools to test, and a lot of them won't let you unless you're a big company paying a lot.
Right.
But one of the challenges in general with Lambda is that it's dynamic, it's running for a bit and it's gone. So yeah, you can use, there's the different types of static or dynamic testing, whatever. The dynamic testing is hard, so I always emphasize people do that static analysis because that's your best bet. And I would say go try out the different tools and see which one works, because obviously you have whatever type of code you're using, the tool has to support that code base. So just looking at the different function factors and try to get a free trial. I think they will give you, if you're a big company, they'll give you like one application to go test. So I would definitely say try them out. I don't want to say names, but I've heard some are better than others.
Yeah. I don't want to get into the vendor world, but yeah, I think they're all evolving with their capabilities in scanning Lambda functions.
But scanning the code is going to be, it's an API. I mean, most of us usually an API call. So,
but just to find those like injection points, like, oops, you did this a little bit wrong, or, some other input sanitization problem, I guess at the end of the day, they're really Python and JavaScript files. Yeah,
it's going to be, that is a little bit challenging. But if you have, like secrets and code, like I've scanned, there's a way you can pull down, if you have access, and pull down all the Lambda function code, for example, and I've scanned that with like really simple scanning tools, and it does find things like secrets in code and other things like that. But yeah, I think it is a little bit different in the way the functions are written. So I don't know how well they handle, like, for example, the structure of a Lambda function. I don't know which ones handle that best and how, or if it matters.
Yeah, I'm with you. And then if it calls another Lambda function and that's not like, well, it's like branching problems, but are like a little bit different.
Yeah. I think that's where you get into the idea.
I have a question.
Test integration.
Yeah.
I have a question for a learning environment. In our project OWASP, we have Pixie as a vulnerable app. Are you aware of any vulnerable environment for the cloud or even serverless that can be used to learn?
Yeah, there's one called Serverless Goat. I have some friends in Seattle actually that work Rhino Security, and they're always, writing
really good
things.
Yeah.
And yeah, those guys are awesome. So they're always doing something interesting, and they create. And I haven't used it myself, but I definitely talk about in my class, like, hey, go try this out. So Serverless Go is written for that purpose. I don't know. Does OWASP have one? I don't know.
Not for serverless that I am aware of. No.
You have the examples online, so you could definitely go set up those examples and practice with them in the serverless top 10, because they kind of give you examples of code that you could go run in your own environment and test with that as well.
Cool.
I have a question. I heard somewhere that you like wrote a book or something. Can you like tell us about it? Like what?
Yes, I did. Yeah, Nancy mentioned it, but I wrote a book called Cybersecurity for Executives in the Cloud. Although it says executives, it's really for anyone who's kind of new to cyber. But I wrote it with that title because I feel that executives really need to be aware, and they can't just shirk off the responsibility and say that's someone else's problem anymore. As I wrote about in the first chapter, you see executives in front of Congress in the US and they have to defend their actions. So it's a really good idea. I also think that at the highest level, security is not necessarily technical. I think this is what Nancy does, but it's more like risk, right? How much risk do you have in your environment? Trying to measure that. So it has some new ideas for how do you measure risk in your environment. So at the executive level and at the highest level, that's what security is. It's risk assessment. It's not how did you configure your S3 bucket. It's how much risk do you have in your environment? How can you mitigate it? How can you manage that? But then to understand that, you have to go down to a lower level. You have to understand basic cybersecurity fundamentals like open ports and how do CVEs work, and so all these terms that security people are throwing out and your eyes are glazing over. You don't know what they mean. This book will help you understand why are security people using all these weird words. What are they talking about? And so that's kind of the premise of why I wrote it. Also has lots of personal stories and like how I got into security and things that happened to me over the course of my career. So yeah.
Cool. I also heard that like you give like this really kick-ass training or something.
Thanks, Tanya. Yeah, I wrote a security class. So I used to teach for SANS Institute for a while, but now I wrote my own class and it has a bunch of labs. Usually give it in person only, so it's a little bit challenging right now. I did agree to give it to one company remotely because I was talking to them before this whole crazy time started. So we'll see how that goes. But for the most part, I do it in person. I have a couple labs that are really interactive in person, so we'll have to figure that out. But yeah, it's a lot of fun, and it's really written for all levels. So whether you're new to security or you're experienced in security, it will show you the basics and then how they work in the cloud, and then shows, defenses and attacks, and have full day of networking and pen testing and all these good things. So yeah, it's really fun. I love doing it, and then so far I've gotten good feedback.
So is what you're saying that we should hire you for cloud pen tests? I feel like
I want to.
Okay, so it's good. Okay, so I know what to do now. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Tanya.
Just want to add, if you're not aware, if you're listening in and you're not aware, we're having a giveaway. We're giving away a copy of the book. So I have the link in the chat. So please, you have a few minutes to sign up, and at random, I'll be using that tool to pick a winner. So go ahead. You have maybe 2-3 minutes to sign up.
Awesome.
Whoa.
Cool. Okay. So do we have more questions in the chat, Tanya?
1 second. I was just tweeting, if you want to buy Teri's book, you can do it here.
Oh my gosh, thank you.
Obviously do it like right now. Like, don't wait. Not for like any particular reason, but just because I want to. Okay, so as a teacher yourself, CS students don't get cloud security lectures or skills at all in academia. How can we help them get some cloud security exposure?
You can take a class, but you can also, how I learned was going online. Well, I shouldn't say that. I took lots of security classes. I've like way too many security certs just because I had to do that to get my master's. But yeah, first of all, I want to say there should be more cloud security training, like 100%. But you can go up and you can find a lot of free tutorials. If you can't, pay for a separate class, which I totally understand. It took me a long time to find a way to fund my security education. So I completely understand that. If you want to, my book is not 100% cloud security, but will give you all the security basics to apply to security. And then it talks about how to leverage automation and cloud technology to have better security in your cloud accounts. So there's that. And yeah, there's a lot of free, white papers and tutorials out there. Just read everything you can, watch as many videos as you can, and keep learning.
So someone in the chat said, hey, I just bought your book, so like take me out of the giveaway. Thanks.
Oh, thank you.
We'll
Awesome.
see.
Thank you.
So would it be time to pick a winner? Let me use my
I
tool.
feel yes.
Yeah, eh? Okay. I'm
Yeah.
just adding the first few.
If you like this stream, please click the thumbs up button, or click the thumbs up button on all of the streams and videos that we've made, and subscribe. And then like tell your cool friend at work that you want them to subscribe, and then maybe also click lots of thumbs up, because it helps other people see us, and then maybe more people can learn, and we can help the whole world be more secure. Okay, Nancy.
Oh.
Okay.
I should have mentioned something else too. I completely blanked. So Tanya has a website and she does application security. So go there if you're trying to learn security. And it's like, what? This is $7 a month? It's totally cheap.
Yeah, it's $7 a month.
It's supposed to be more than that.
We have a winner.
We have a winner. It's Maya, M-I-A-H-A. I have your email. I'll be contacting you soon and send the book your way really quickly, as well as quickly as Amazon can.
Yeah, I'm probably my own, and they're sitting at the post office because I'm afraid to go out right now.
Great, that was awesome. So, do you want to wrap up? Should we wrap up? Yeah, we talked about all what Teri does, but I'll just give you another few seconds if you have last words on where to follow you, if there's anything else we should know about what you're doing, and keep in contact with you.
Yeah, I just my name is my Twitter handle. So if you can find my name on the chat there, you can follow me, or my company if you want to follow that. In my company, I only post new blog posts if you don't want to hear all my other commentary on the news. So those are ways to follow me. And yeah, you can contact me on LinkedIn if you need some cloud services.
There are many, many, many thank yous in the chat. Many, many, many. To the whole team.
That's awesome.
Well, thank you guys for having me, and also
thank you so much.
I appreciate
Thank
it.
you, Teri. You're amazing. But you already know that I like fawn over you and like think you're incredible. So I'll try not to make you blush too much.
Thank you, everybody. That's it for today.
Thank you, guys.
Yes.
Thank you, Nancy, for being the really organized one who herds all of us cats onto this space-themed show. Nancy, you're so great.
Thank you. You're so nice. I'll try to get sound right the next time. Like, that's going to be my challenge.
That's like the hardest part.
I feel like whatever test I do, I still mess up, but that's okay. Thank you, everyone. That was fun. And I think we have another show this month at the end of the month on the 26th. Follow us on Meetup and everywhere, and you'll get an announcement of our next show. So that's it. Take care. Have a good one. Stay safe. Bye.
Bye-bye.